If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel and join our journey across the galaxy. The first time Lieutenant Elara Voss walked through the iron gates of Kraath Station, she carried nothing but a battered field kit. The station rose from the volcanic shelf of Dearth, for like a fortress built from the bones of something ancient. Its towers were black obsidian fused with alloy plating, scorched by 1,000 re-entries. Wind moved through its corridors like something alive, growling through vents carved wide enough to fit creatures 4 times her size. Elara was small by the station's standards. She was soft-voiced where the instructors roared. She was warm-eyed where the drill commanders were cold as vacuum. She was human where everything else was apex. The cubs watched her arrive from the upper balconies, their massive heads tilted sideways with the particular alien expression she would later learn meant deep, cautious fascination. They were predator-born. Every single one descended from species that ruled the food chains of 6 different star systems. Their claws were retractable but present. Their teeth came in rows. Their eyes caught light in the dark with a brightness that would have made lesser creatures run. But they were also young. Young in the way that left cracks in all that engineered ferocity. Young in the way that made them stare at the strange soft being walking their yard with something closer to hunger for understanding than hunger for prey. Elara looked up at them without flinching. She raised one bare hand. She waved. The silence that followed lasted for full seconds before a small, amber-furred cub named Veth made a sound no one on the station had ever heard before. He laughed. That first month was brutal in the way only places built for predators could be brutal. The obstacle courses dissolved and reformed. The gravity regulators shifted without warning. The mess hall served protein slabs she could not eat without supplementing from her own ration packs. Veth was the first to approach her directly. He came on the 4th night, padding silently to the edge of her bunk space and sitting with the stillness of a predator, not hunting but watching. He was 3 years old in standard cycle terms. He smelled like warm stone. Lara looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her ration pack, tore a piece of dried fruit in 2, and held one piece out without a word. He took it with a delicacy that should not have been possible given the size of his claws. He sat beside her bunk until morning. After that, there was no more distance. The other cubs circled her with the slow gravity that moons use to spiral toward a planet they trust. Rixa came next. Gray-scaled with bioluminescent fringe markings that pulsed faint blue when she was happy. She had a habit of pressing her flat, broad head against Elara's shoulder when lessons ended, as if the warmth meant something her language had no word for yet. Then came Doru, who was enormous, even by his clade standards. He was terrified of the deep-water tank in the aquatics bay. Elara found him sitting outside the aquatics door one morning, shaking in small seismic tremors his body could not suppress. She sat beside him on the cold floor. She did not ask him to go in. She sat with him for an hour, until the trembling stopped. She went in with him when he was ready. She stayed in the water beside him even as it rose to her chin, while barely reaching his knee joints. He passed his aquatic certification with her voice steady in his ear. These things built something that had no name in the station's tactical manuals. Loyalty is close. But loyalty does not reach the full shape of what grew between Elara Voss and the 64 Predator, cubs of Kraath Station, Cohort 9. She taught them human things without meaning to. She taught them that silence could be a kindness. She pressed her forehead to Veth's massive brow on the day he passed his first live-fire evaluation. She covered Rixa with her own jacket when the cooling systems failed at night, and Rixa's fringe went dim with cold. She fixed the strap on Daru's gear harness 14 times because his hands were too large to manage the buckle. She learned each cub's name in their own language. She learned the specific pitch of each one's distress call. She memorized which ones needed to be left alone after failure, and which ones needed someone to sit close. Commander Threx, who had claws like black iron, told the station medic in private that the human was doing something to his cohort that 3 years of standard bonding protocols had never achieved. He said it like a complaint. The medic knew it was not. The station began to change in small ways. The mess hall quietly adjusted supply orders to include nutrient packets suited to human digestion. The drill courses became fractionally less likely to shift gravity without warning during the hours Elara walked them with the cubs. The station was not built for softness. It had learned to make room for it anyway. Elara had been on Kraath for 14 months when the morning came that changed everything. The cubs were already in formation when she came through the corridor door. Veth saw her first with that particular attention predators give to things they have decided matter. He saw her cross the threshold. He saw the very slight change in her gait that no creature without predator-level spatial tracking would have detected. A fraction slower in the right leg. A barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. The morning drill began. She ran the course as she always did. But today, she was slower than herself. Halfway through the second circuit, she stopped. She pressed one hand to the barrier wall. She stood very still. Rixa's fringe went suddenly dark. The entire cohort went still with her. Elara turned. Her face was the color of the volcanic sky before it turned orange. Her eyes found Veth's across the yard with a look that said nothing and everything. Then her legs stopped holding her. The sound that came from 64 predator cubs in that moment could not be replicated by any station alarm. It was not a roar. It was not a cry. It was something between the two. Veth reached her before anyone else. He dropped to his knees in the dust beside her. He pressed his face close to hers. She was breathing, too hot, too fast. He looked up. Moisture was collecting at the corners of his eyes. Predator eyes are not built for tears. The biology is not there in the same way. But Veth's eyes were wet. Doru was already roaring for the medic channel. Rixa had her fringe pressed hard against Elara's arm, her whole body vibrating with the low-frequency warmth transfer of her species. The other cubs formed a ring without being instructed to. Pack instinct. Protection instinct. Commander Threx came through the yard door at a run which no one had ever seen him do. He assessed the scene in one sweep. He opened his command channel, said, "Get me Medical Bay 1 now." He said, "Do not send a junior." Said, "I want the triad." The triad of Kraath Station were 3 beings whose reputations existed in the same register as the station's weapon systems. Dr. Vale was Kethborn. 7 feet of gray-plated precision with 12-fingered hands built for procedures standard instruments could not perform. Dr. Oren was aquatic in origin and moved through air with slight discomfort, but her diagnostic capabilities were unmatched across 6 medical registries. The third the cubs called the Quiet One communicated through modulated pressure waves. Its decisions had never once been wrong. They arrived in the medical bay 12 minutes after the call. Lara's vital readings scrolled across the diagnostic wall in orange, not yet red, not green. The cubs had followed her. All 64 lined the corridor outside the bay doors in perfect absolute silence. Their eyes were all the same direction. Veth sat at the front directly against the doors. His knees were on the cold metal floor. His enormous hands were flat against the panel. He could not see through it. Pressed against it anyway, as if contact was the same as closeness. Rixa settled beside him, her fringe still dark. Doru placed one massive hand over Veth's against the door. The rest arranged themselves behind these 3. Hours passed. The lighting cycled. The mess hall served meals that none of them went to collect. No one ate. No one left. Inside the bay, the diagnosis came in stages. Human immune systems were not designed for extended exposure to Durith 4's atmospheric particulate. Station filtration compensated for most of the toxic load, but the remainder accumulated. Over 14 months, this had reached a threshold the intake assessment had calculated as statistically improbable. Elara had reached it anyway. The toxin load had also interacted with a rare genetic variant in her cellular structure. Survivable, but only with a compound, synthesized from one specific biological source. The venom gland secretion of a Kraath predator. Not a synthesized approximation, the real thing. It's willingly given. The venom's molecular structure changed if the donor was under stress. A stress donation would kill the patient. A willing, calm donation would save her. Dr. Vale opened a secondary channel. She said, "Send me one of the cubs." Commander Threx stepped into the corridor. 64 sets of eyes turned to him. Said, "One of you needs to come inside." Said, "It has to be willing." Veth stood before the words finished. He said, "It will be me." Rixa rose. She said, "No." She said, "My chemistry is already registered in the base systems." Something passed between Veth and Rixa. Something wordless. Something older than any language they had been taught. Veth sat back down. Rixa went through the doors alone. Veth pressed his hands back against the cold metal. His shoulders shook with emotion that was not a predator motion. Something softer. Something more devastating than anything his body had been built for. Inside the bay, Rixa stood at the edge of the platform where Elara lay. She looked at the woman who had covered her with a jacket in the cold, whose voice had been the last thing she processed before sleep more nights than she could count. Elara's chest rose and fell with too much effort. Rixa's fringe flickered once. Dr. Oren explained what was needed. Rixa did not hesitate. She sat beside the platform. She placed her foreleg along the scanner bed. She was calm in the way that Elara had taught her. Not the cold stillness of suppressed response. The real stillness. The stillness that comes from deciding that someone else's life is worth more than your own fear. Her fringe lit soft, steady blue. Dr. Vale worked with a precision that was nearly reverent. The extraction took 4 minutes. Rixa kept her eyes on Elara's face the entire time. She said something in a low register that the translators did not catch cleanly. Something that sounded like stay. Something that sounded like we are not finished yet. The synthesis took 2 more hours. Veth sat with his back against the door, his knees drawn up, his enormous frame folded into the smallest shape it could make. He looked exactly as old as he was, which was very young. Doru rocked very slightly forward and back in the self-soothing motion of his species in early childhood. He had not done this since his first week at the station. Nobody mentioned it. Some cubs had their foreheads pressed together in the bonding posture used in grief vigils, not in grief. In the territory that borders grief. The territory you enter when someone you love is somewhere you cannot follow. The bay doors opened at hour 4. Dr. Vale stepped out. Her movement had a quality the cubs read instantly with their predator-tuned assessment. Not the movement of someone bringing finality. The movement of someone bringing difficulties safely past. Veth was on his feet before she had taken a second step. Dr. Vale looked at him. She said the human will recover. She said the treatment has been administered. She said the next 12 hours are critical, but the compound is working. She said Rixa performed with exceptional composure. She paused. She said the human is asking for her cubs. The sound that moved through 64 predators at that moment was not something station audio logs had a category for. It was the sound of a held breath released at a depth no instrument had thought to measure. They were allowed in 6 at a time. Veth walked to Elara's platform with a deliberateness that used every fraction of control his training had given him, because without it, he would have run. Elara was propped slightly upright. Her color was still wrong, but less wrong. She looked at Veth, and her face did the thing it always did when she saw him. It opened, the way a door opens when the person who lives there comes home. She reached out her hand. Veth pressed his face into her palm. His eyes were wet. He had stopped being confused by this. Her fingers curled against the warm plated bone of his brow. Doru made a low sound. Rixa pressed her fringe gently against Elara's knee. Her fringe was blue. Steady, solid, unhurried blue. The blue of something safe. The blue of something that has come back from a dark edge. Recovery was not gentle by station standards. Dr. Oren adapted the bay with quiet efficiency. The ambient temperature was raised for degrees. The lighting was shifted toward Durath 4's warm orange dawn spectrum because Elara's physiological readings showed subtle positive response to it. The cubs had rotating access. Veth in the mornings, Rixa in the afternoons. Doru at evening, the others in their pairs throughout the day. The recovery room was never empty. Elara was never alone. She slept more than usual. When she woke, the cubs were there. She told them stories in the warm, slow voice she used when training was finished. She told them about Earth, not the textbook version. The Earth of her specific memory. The smell of rain on dry pavement, and the feeling of being small beneath a very large sky and finding that comfortable rather than threatening. Doru asked whether the sky was the same sky everywhere, or a different sky in different places. Elara said it was all the same sky. He thought about this, said then every creature under it is neighbors. She looked at him with the expression the cubs had learned meant she was feeling something large. She said yes, said exactly yes. Rixa found Elara crying on the 7th day. She came in quietly. She sat beside the bed without asking the question. Elara answered it anyway. She said I was scared. She said I did not know if I would get to stay. She said I did not know if I would get to see you all grow up. Rixa sat with this. Her fringe pulsed slow and quiet. She said we did not let you go. She said Veth did not move from the door. She said we were there the whole time. Elara pressed her face into Rixa's warm, scaled shoulder. Her shoulders moved with the motion Rixa had learned meant the human was releasing something held too long. Rixa stayed completely still. She let herself be used as the anchor she was. Being warm in return was not a difficult thing to understand. On the 10th day, Elara walked the lower corridor for the first time since her collapse, appeared without being summoned. Veth on her left at standard guard spacing. Doru, behind her at the precise distance, optimal for interception of any rear threat. Rixa moving ahead with the easy authority of a creature who has accepted she will be first through anything uncertain. Station personnel, they passed, stopped and stood aside with the body posture that in many species indicates respect without instruction. A supply officer told her shift partner afterward that watching the human walk the corridor with her cubs was the most beautiful formation she had ever seen on this station. Her partner thought for a moment. She said it was not like a military formation. She said it was like watching someone come home. On day 23, Elara returned to the training yard. The dawn was spreading orange layers across the horizon panels. The obstacle configuration had been set to standard level. She looked at it. She looked at Threx. She said, "Set it to advanced." He said the medical clearance advises moderation. She said she knew what it said. She said, "Set it to advance." Threx looked at her. He looked at the cohort, watching this exchange with 64 pairs of very attentive eyes. He reset the configuration. Elara walked to the starting position. The cubs moved into formation around her. Not behind her, around her. The way a team moves when it has learned that strength is not about putting the fastest at the front. It is about moving so that no part of the formation is alone. The signal tone ran. They moved together. Veth ran on her left at a pace that kept him beside her. Rixa moved ahead with her fringe steady blue. Doru came behind with the careful motion of something large that has chosen to be gentle. The course shifted, and the gravity fluctuated, and the station threw everything it had at them. They ran through all of it together. They crossed the completion marker together. Elara's lungs burned in the good way, a way that means the body is working and present and alive. She straightened. Vith's eyes were warm in the way she had spent 14 months learning to read correctly. That warmth had no word in his language. She had found one in hers. She said it now. She said family. He held the word. He said it back to her in her language. It moved through the other cubs like dawn moved through the sky panels, in layers. Warm, settling. True. Kraath Station was not built for the kind of love that had grown inside it. Its architects had planned for tactical efficiency, load-bearing capacity, weapon storage. They had not planned for a human woman who waved at predator cubs from the yard floor. They had not planned for 64 young hunters learning what it meant to keep watch over something soft. They had not planned for a small amber-furred cub pressing his hands against a medical bay door all through a long night refusing to leave. They had not planned for venom willingly given at the depth of genuine calm. The station had not been planned for these things. It had been changed by them anyway. All the best structures are these. Kraath had become the station where the human woman walked the corridors with her cubs, where Commander Threx wrote family in his command logs without qualification, where 64 predator cubs were learning to be the finest soldiers in the sector, not because of fear or cold efficiency, but because someone small had sat beside them in the dark. Elara Voss had come to Kraath, carrying nothing but a battered field kit. She had built something there that no field kit had categories for. One warm moment at a time. One jacket left behind in the cold. One hand reaching toward something frightening without flinching. One morning when her legs stopped holding her, and 64 predators stopped the world to hold her instead, she was alive. She was home. The dawn came up orange over Daruth 4. The training yard was full of sound, full of the rumbling laughter of predator cubs, full of the voice of one human woman calling them by their names in their own languages. Not one of those languages had a word for what she was to them. She was not a word. She was a fact. A fact that 64 young killers carried in their chests like a second heartbeat. Warm, constant, unbreakable. Hers.